Aaron Wilson, congratulations on Little Tornadoes.
Thank you.
Which is finally getting a cinema release. Tell us when your film was supposed to be released in cinemas and what's caused the delay, he said, knowing the answer.
Just a little bug that's been affecting the world. 2021 actually, at MIFF, we were meant to have our debut in the cinema at Melbourne International Film Festival. And of course, the Melbourne lockdowns meant that we couldn't have an in-person event. The next time we were meant to have a screening in Melbourne was in November. We were meant to be releasing in cinemas. So just because of the knock-on effect of the lockdown, we couldn't release in cinemas until around about now.
Okay. How do you feel now that it's finally getting a release after 10 years?
12 years.
12 years making this movie. It's finally getting a release. Tell me honestly, the easy answer is relief. There must also be a nugget of frustration in there too.
There's a lot of frustration, but I think after 12 years, you've got to focus on the positives. You've got to focus on what keeps you motivated and moving forward and buoyant. I mean, filmmaking's like that. You can't get bogged down with every little frustration. You have to look ahead, look 3-4 steps ahead. So for me, it's meeting the audiences, getting out and finding new audiences, taking the story about regional Australia to regional cities and regional cinemas. That's where I'm looking ahead to. So I'm looking to try to bring on more cinemas and get more exhibitors interested in the project. So our Q&A tour that we've got right now grows, and I can just get out and meet audiences. That's my goal for the next 2 months.
In a log line, in an elevator pitch, describe the outline of the story of this absolutely beautiful film.
Little Tornadoes is about a father raising his 2 young kids after his wife has vanished, and at the same time new immigrants have arrived in the area, bringing new colour and energy and life that effectively changes his family and enriches the world in which he lives. And
it's set in rural Australia, 1971.
Correct.
Why did you choose that particular year, given that you were born in
1976? Not too far behind.
Okay, 1976. So you were Star Wars -1.
Pretty much.
Born. So why did you set this film in that particular year?
The reason why I set it in 1971 is there was a period of great social change happening in that country. The women's liberation movement was taking off. New migrants arriving from different countries, and Vietnam War protests happening in the background. So I wanted to create a story at its heart that's about a family and the intimacy of their traumas and struggles, parallel against the greater social change happening in the background that we can all relate to. But that social change is something that we can relate to today, because in 2018, 2019, 2020, there's a lot of change happening in the world. So I really think it's just taking an example of what happened in our past and paralleling it against what's happening in our country today.
How would you describe your directing style?
Style. That's an interesting question. I think I operate by feel. I sort of don't, when I'm on set, I've planned everything, I've discussed everything, I've gone through spreadsheets. I love a good spreadsheet with my team, and we have a shared vision that we're all now ready to execute. And invariably on set, that's when chaos reigns and stuff goes wrong. And that's when, as a director, you've got to do your thing. And for me, I operate by feel. I focus on the emotion that I want to convey, and we have a script, but I'm really just observing what's happening in the moment and reacting to the changes that are happening with the cast and the crew, and trying to holistically create a mood and a feel that I think in my head reflects the story.
There are many moments of stillness in some of the scenes, especially the early scenes when you're establishing the story, where it looks like there's very little going on. For instance, when Leo is preparing lunch for the kids to go to school, it's just a locked-on shot of him doing it. But obviously what you're seeing is a man, almost the day after he realises his wife has left him, trying to remain normal, trying to maintain some degree of normalcy. Your style is also very observational, as you say, and you seem very happy, unlike many filmmakers today, to let the scene play, to let the camera roll.
Yeah, I think it's back to operating by feel. I want to create a space and give the performers the parameters, but then let them work within that space and let them decide the rhythm, I guess, of the scene. I like to think of filmmaking as meditation for me. I'm a very hyperactive person. I'm always overthinking and talking a lot. So filmmaking is my way of just slowing the world down a little bit and looking at the details in life that we often overlook, or the mundane textures that are seemingly unimportant. But if you look at them with greater clarity, they're things that connect us all, like in the scene that you mentioned. Just the making lunch and little details of breakfast. I wanted to let those details be there, but breathe and have enough space so the performers can just do their thing. But in doing that, they inform us about their character and how they connect to the world.
I bet even money. If you had 1,000 filmmakers, including you, I'd ask them, how are you going to establish when this film is set? 999 of them would say, I'm just trying to caption at the bottom. You obviously made a deliberate decision not to run a caption. Can you just tell us a bit about that decision? Establishing the period through what you're seeing on TV and what you're hearing on the radio.
I think that's the beauty of cinema, where you're in a dark space and you're prepared for a film to slowly evolve, and you feed you information and feelings. You collect and build a sense and feeling of the world and the characters and the struggles they're going through. You have no distractions, so you really have just this dark space, this communal space to focus on. And let the details resonate with you. So for me, it's the story as well. You learn about our characters scene by scene. You don't learn up front, this is the situation, this is what he's got to go through. Each scene you realise, okay, now there's a different perspective on him. Now I understand why she's doing that. It's just another element of cinema for me, that you don't tell everybody straight up, and you show them through visuals or perhaps songs, just little cues to make them feel like, I think I know where I am, but it's not didactic 1971. I don't think it's that important for the cinema that I want to tell.
You want the film's themes to resonate today. Feminism, it's quite interesting that where we are with feminism is probably 20 years behind where it should be, so that's very relevant. Immigration, unfortunately, hot button topic today. Also masculinity, specifically masculinity. I'm very keen to know what your intention was when you actually shot the film 10 years ago, 12 years ago. There's been a lot of changes with rural men, how they're now being invited. You don't have to bottle up your emotions now. You can actually be much more. There are all these services now. You can be much more open about how you're feeling. Tell us. There are services saying we want to know because we want to help. Tell us about the depiction of the male that you have in this film in relation to that theme, and whether you actually registered that no, things have changed in the last 10 years for rural men.
Things have changed, and over the last 50 years since the film is set. But at the same time, while people are aware, men are aware, we can talk about things, and we should, and we should always check ourselves. There's still a large suicide rate in regional Australia. It isn't that we don't have the sort of attitude or the ability to communicate now. Think about the setting. It's quite remote. It's quite isolated. So that physical isolation really plays into the emotional isolation sometimes that can affect us. And if you're going through traumas or resonant effects of trauma in your family or in the world around you, or like a pandemic, these things can slowly eat away at you, and unless you're checking yourself or you're conscious, they can really affect you emotionally. So I think there's always going to be a problem when people live in remote areas, and I think the character in the film, yes, he was set 70 years ago, but we relate to the situation he's going through, because you feel the sense of the physical space having such an enormous and overwhelming presence on him and his situation. It's very relatable. And also the interesting thing for me about regional areas and what affects small towns are the sort of resonant effects of trauma, in my experience in a country town from World War II. So a whole bunch of men were sent off to war, and they came back, or a lot of them didn't come back, but those who did come back were told, don't tell your wives about what you went through, you'll only upset them. And their wives were told, don't ask your husbands because you'll only upset them. So they were encouraged not to talk. And then if you think about the resonant effects of that trauma on the next generation, and then what that next generation passes on to their kids, those sort of things are really interesting for me in exploring, I guess, what we're faced with as a family on an intimate level, and what we have to deal with, and also what we have to look at overcoming. So in the film, for me, it's very important that the main character realizes he has this knock-on effect from his father's trauma and the trauma in his own family, and he has to make a decision at some point. Does he choose to stop that, or try to stop that from affecting his children?
Now, tell us just briefly about Leonard Winter, who is an extraordinary actor anyway, but he puts in a terrific performance in this film where the less is more method seems to be in play. Tell us a bit about working with him, how he came on board, and how you directed him. What do you say to an actor? Do you just say keep it all inside? How did that work? Tell us.
With Mark was a fascinating character because from the beginning, from the auditions, he came in with a sense of who he felt this character was. And he told me that it was informed by someone in his family, and he kind of based the character loosely on this person. But also, once we got up to the Murray and he could absorb himself in that world, he wanted to just linger and meet people, and in particular go to the factory where his character works. And he said, can I work here for a week? So we basically introduced him to the factory, the blokes on the factory floor, helped him out, put him to work, went through safety induction, and he spent a week operating a lathe. So by the end of it, he knew exactly how it worked, and he knew his station, and he just fit into this world, which I guess for all intents and purposes looks like it's out of the 70s. But it just allowed him to get a sense of the quietness and the isolation in that workspace, in the context of that regional world. So when we started rolling, he already had this backstory he created, and he already had this lived-in experience from working on set. And that, for me, is how I like to work as a director too. I like to work by feel. I don't like rehearsals, like line reads. So I like to explore backstory and what a character might do or might not do, and just explore that space in the pre-production before we get to filming.
For what it's worth, you just paid out on an instinct that you have when you're watching those scenes, because you realise, oh, this is just an actor doing dummy moves around an inert piece of machinery, and you go, actually, he looks like he knows what he's doing, and that was actually the case. He actually worked with factory workers.
Yes, both Mark and Fabio worked in the factory beforehand, so they not just had an understanding of the machinery, but an understanding of how the physicality of the two of them as kind of work colleagues in that space, and how would that then play out when we filmed them.
I believe that young filmmakers today, the further away they get from a period, the more capable they are of recreating that period. Is that the case? That recreating 1971 was, I guess, relatively easier than it would have been, say, before digital, before the internet?
I think that space, it's not that far ago for me. It's just before I was born. So as a kid, I grew up with the sort of echoes of the early 70s. I think when I told this story, I wanted it to feel like a dream, a reflection on that world. So it's not a direct recreation of what it would have been like. Sure, I'm informed by my having been from that world and know the people and the sort of the authentic characters, but I also wanted it to feel like a nostalgic reflection on that time. Something that was kind of like a celebration of where I come from, but at the same time I'm being honest about the problems that existed, the racism. Was
there also the case that I guess you were careful not to overload the frame with period detail, which sometimes filmmakers do, mainly because I think they have now so many resources to do it. With this one, it's the fridge, it's something in the background, the little canisters in the background, the cars obviously, but the signs on the shops, small markers that make the point about where the film is set and when the film is set. Was that the case, that you didn't want to overdo it?
Definitely, but also some of those details are just still there. The signs are still there, and we just embellish them. The factory, it's pretty much the same as it was 40, 50, 60 years ago. To the point where the owner said, "Oh, we'll clean the walls for you, we'll make it clean." I said, "No, do not touch anything, do not remove the grease. Leave that texture and lived-in experience." So we found these lived-in spaces, but also then we had a great production designer and costume designer who really worked with the people in the town. Because it was a small community, they could go out and speak to people, to shop owners, to museums, and actually ask the people who lived through that period, "Come and have a look, how does this look and feel to you?" So we kind of had that community input into the look and the feel, and I guess they knew that I grew up there too, so they'd say, "Aaron, you remember that, wouldn't you? But you wouldn't have that, that was too early," or "It was 1971, but no one would have bought that." So it was really using the community to help us decide what should stay and what we should just get rid of.
Now, you have spoken about how organic the process of making this film was, even in post-production and in the editing, and with the bringing on of Christos Tsokis to help write the narration. You've spoken about how you reshaped a lot of the film in the post-production process. I'd like you to contrast that with, say, Alfred Hitchcock, who famously said that the most boring part of making a film is shooting it. Because all you're doing is you're just photographing what everyone has agreed the film is. It's been storyboarded to death. It's been, the plot has been absolutely worked through, and you're just shooting it, which appears to occupy the other end of the spectrum that you like to work on. Can you just tell us about that process and whether you have any envy for Hitchcock and his approach?
I would say I'm very appreciative of diversity in filmmaking. I love Hitchcock's films, but at the same time, it's not really the way I work. I love shooting because it's when everything that you plan to do doesn't really go as you planned it to on the day. So you've got to adapt and adjust, and that for me is the beauty of directing. How do you work with the team and go by feel based upon the sum total of work that you've done to prepare to get here? What comes out is something entirely not necessarily different, but unique to that time and that place that you filmed it. And then in editing, it really you're responding to the footage and you're responding to something different to what you shot. You're away from the shoot, and you've got to focus on what's the story you want the audience to feel. So for me, it's really about working closely with my editor, and in the case of this film, working with Christos to really add an extra element of narration to the story that's going to not contrast, but really strengthen what we've already got. Almost like distill it. We have this essence of the story, and anything the new that comes in is sort of enhancing and strengthening the story.
Aaron Wilson, can you tell us about the relationship between passion and toil, given how long it's taken you to get this film together?
Passion, toil, plus, I guess, support. I rely on a lot of people to help get me this far. Sure, I got the passion to get me through, and the toil, I guess, for me is an ethic that I learned from my father. He's a farmer, where you do whatever you have to do at any given time of the day to get the work done. You've got a goal and you've got to get to the end. But also the people around me that support me through this, and the collaborators that help create the project with me, I wouldn't be able to do it without them. So I think passion only gets you so far. Toil plus the right people make you a better person and make film a better product. 12
years since you shot it. It sounds like a very romantic testament to your dedication to the film and your passion for the film. It's not really tenable, is it? You can't be spending 12 years every time you want to make a film. We certainly don't want that. Can you just tell us a little bit about that issue? I believe that it should be much quicker, that filmmakers should be able to turn over a film much quicker, if for no other reason than to establish a bond with the audience. If it takes too long, people are simply going to forget who you were. You made Canopy, which is a lovely film that came out in 2014. We should have seen something from you in 2016 or 2018. What do you think of this issue?
Making film is hard at the best of times, but in this case, it was just a biggest struggle was probably securing financing and getting support, just to finish filming, but mostly to do our post-production. And I like to think that we're a big country, we should be encouraging diversity in storytelling and in the stories we're choosing to make. That makes for interesting cinema. We don't make stories about the same thing. So I guess it's a very hard thing to define. How do you fund a film over another? The reason it took us so long is that we struggled to find finance to finish the film. I had a great team on board who were able to work with me through post-production, and we just, through sheer force of will, got through the edit. I would use money that I made from commercials to go and do pickups, and we also had to wait for different times of the year for harvest to happen, summer to come back. So we did make use of every year and every summer to go and film little snippets. But if it was my choice, I would have, liked to have finished it a little bit earlier. Okay. I think it's healthier for filmmaking if you can get your film done in a short space of time, and then move on. And then each film helps you to grow and learn. So the more films you can make, the more you can grow and learn. I think it doesn't matter who you are. You can be uber experienced. It's just very hard to. I think particularly in Australia to get support for films. I think diversity in funding is also important. We look at, I think it should be a government-led initiative that we look at how do we better support Australian creatives, creating stories and creating films that we release not just for Australian audiences but for worldwide audiences. The more films we make, the better we get, and the more interesting our stories become and sharing with the world.
Now, you've mentioned how you're trying to make an informal trilogy with Canopy, the guy in World War II, and that is kind of got a implied relationship with the father played in this film, who's a war veteran. So what is your next film, and is there a sort of an informal trilogy happening here? Or are you just saying that because it sounds great?
It does sound good, but it actually came from the idea of a script that had 3 chapters, and we kind of separated it into 3 films. This third film that I have in my head is set today, and it follows effectively the boy that we see in Little Tornadoes as an adult. And it probably explores issues that are more closer to my heart, growing up gay in the country and what that means, and that idea of identity and finding your sense of self in the regional world, and exploring our context to our Southeast Asian region, our neighbours. That's very important for me in my work. So that's going to be coming into the story and the characters in this next film.
I guess you could also have taken the character from Canopy and he'd be very old now, but you could bring him into the present day. Yeah. Has that ever been a thought?
He may be in this story. It's just a story in my head. I've got lots of stories for films, and I've got a variety of things. So there's no plans for the next one, but that's certainly there in my head, the idea of kind of closing this trilogy of stories about the world that I came from, about regional Australia, and the importance of setting, but also telling stories about this world and its place in greater Australian culture and history.
I'm keen to know about the life the film has now. You've mentioned that you have a roster of Q&A screenings in rural Australia, rural Victoria. What happens then? We're worried, of course, Aaron Wilson of yet again seeing a fine art house Australian film come out with not enough marketing support, and after all the years that the filmmakers put in to make it, coming and going in the space of a week or two. Unfortunately, it's a syndrome in the Australian film industry. Tell us about the life that you want the film to have and that it's likely to have.
I guess I'm a farmer's son, and I'm really going to stick to doing the work that needs to be done to get the project out there. For me, I like to think of filmmaking as a triathlon, where the first stage is getting the money, and you raise the money, you can get the script written. The second stage is making the film, and you complete the post-production. But the third stage is you've got to get it to audience. You've got to reach the people that you want to talk about the film with. So for me, that's what we're doing right now. And it's just as creative as the filmmaking. It's how do you better reach cinemas, and how do you entice people to come into the cinema away from their TVs at home? What's the incentive? What's the visibility and the cut through? So for me, it's a challenge, but I just want to continue for the next 2-3 months, taking the film on the road, meeting audiences, but particularly engaging regional Australia, because after the pandemic, there's a lot of regional cinemas that are doing it tough. So I really want to partner with regional cinemas and hit big major cities and take the film as far as I can, kind of like a band tour, where I'm out there meeting audiences, joined by some of my cast and crew at different points, just to talk about the film and have a discussion around the communal nature of cinema, why that's important, especially in small regional towns. But just in terms of discussing Australian culture and stories that matter to us, and that should matter to us, but that we should be talking more about together as a community.
So just tell us quickly about being part of the MIFF Accelerator Lab, which sounds very mysterious, and the MIFF Premier Fund, and how much that helped.
The MIFF Accelerator Lab has been going for almost 2 decades now, and it was exciting for me because it allowed me to do that thing that you love, which is just meeting other filmmakers, other directors particularly, and just discussing your ideas in an honest and open way, because you're not encouraged to do that much in life. As directors, it can be quite solitary, you're focusing on your own project. But the beauty of meeting other directors and discussing the way you do things, or thoughts and ideas, or even fears or problems, that helps you grow and creates a bit of a support network. So there's people that I met in Accelerator that I am close to today, and I wouldn't have had those connections had I not done Accelerator. And by extension, the Premier Fund was really important for us to actually unlock other funding to get the film done. So in post-production, when we were struggling during the pandemic to find support, MIFF came on board alongside Film Victoria and believed in us. They believed in the story. It wasn't finished, but they believed in the way I expressed that I wanted the film to be finished. And because of that, we had private investors come on and form the rest of the funding to allow us to finish the film. So I'm very appreciative of their support. And it also, we're a local production, we're 95% Victorian, and we're telling a very unique regional Victorian story.
Are you able to tell us around about what the budget was?
The budget? It was, the budget. The budget was under $1 million.
Aaron Wilson, that is remarkable to hear, because one would not have imagined, having seen the film, that would have cost that little. How'd you manage that?
It comes back to working with great people. My team, the sound design, the cinematography, were very particular about how to most efficiently use our time in terms of filming shots, in terms of creating a sense of space with sound where it felt more epic than what we're seeing on screen. So allowing scenes of the world around us to bleed in and make the world feel grander and bigger. But also working with the community in which we shot, regional Australian communities. They're very generous, they're very open, they're very honest. So if you've got a problem or you need help, they will be there day and night to make it work. So I think we pay people for jobs and to hire and rent things, but at the same time they would give above and beyond just to help us get what we needed to get done. I think a lot of the films that I adore and the filmmakers that I respect, they're very efficient at the way they make their cinema. And I'm speaking, it's great cinema. Particularly from around Southeast Asia, where they don't have the resources that even we have, and the ability to have government funding. So they have to find unique and clever ways to tell their story and create a feeling that's unique to their filmmaking experience. So that's all I really try to do. How to distill this story and reflect the sense of this world that I want to convey to the audience, but in a very efficient way that also pays respect to the world, but gives a sense of majesty to the landscape and the environment that we're filming in.
Aaron Wilson, are you ready for the Schembri challenge?
Oh geez, I don't know, I might crumble. At least.
Okay. The scenario is I'm part of a big Hollywood studio and I have a deal for you. So Aaron Wilson, we've seen your beautiful little film And we love it. We really love this film. What we'd like to do is make a deal with you to give it a lovely, carefully curated platform release across the United States. And we've got all the resources to make sure everyone knows that it's coming out, what it's about, and we can put the heft of our studio behind this little film and hopefully give it new life in the United States, and who knows, then maybe into Europe, into Britain and beyond. But there's something that we'd like you to do. We'd like a change to the film. Don't want to change the structure of it so much, but you have this beautiful narration that Christos Tokis helped you write and who's largely responsible for, from the female point of view, talking about her immigrant experience in Australia and so on. We love that, but we'd like you to drop it and replace it with a narration from the male character's point of view, from Leo, because what we want you to do is to punch up the drama. We're not asking you to reshoot scenes of the film so that what is feeling inside are verbalised in very dramatic and attractive ways that people like to see people yelling on screen. We're not asking for that, but we would like that sense of emotion and energy and anger expressed by him through a replacement voiceover. What do you say?
Gee, it's a challenge, isn't it? I might be inclined to say, I have this great next film which speaks exactly to what you're trying to do. It can be achieved for a nominal budget. If you're happy to talk about, keeping the budget low for the next film and coming on to support this next film, knowing how well this one's done and it'll help you, I'd love to explore creating that film that we could then release in the States, which does exactly that. And we could actually lean more into those genre tropes or, story elements and character elements that you really want to explore with what you just said. That would be a great opportunity. What do you say about that?
What we say to that is that we would love to talk to you about doing exactly what you said with your next film, on the proviso that you agree to the changes that we suggest on this film. What do you say?
It's an interesting prospect. I guess it would be great if it was just me as a director in charge, I guess, because I've got investors and sponsors and financiers that are very attached to this project, and they've funded and believed in this film based upon what it is now. I'd have to go back and talk to them before I make any decisions, because really it's sort of out of my hands. But I think you'd really have to wait to see what they have to say about that decision.
Would you go and check with them? And if they said, hey, in exchange for a big studio release across America, we'll always have the original cut of the film. In fact, part of this deal is that when this thing comes out on DVD or when we stream it, we'll have the original version available. So we're not going to burn the negative or anything. We're going to keep it, but we would like to do this fresh version just with the narration. What do you say?
Would you call it the same title? Would you give it the same
title? Yeah. We love the title.
Would you give the same title and you call it the extended, the alternate version? That's an interesting prospect.
Well, that's not how we're going to call it when we release it in America.
So it's the American version, right? Interesting.
Well, it's just going to be not the American version, but the version for America.
Right.
Well, just because Americans they're lovely people, I know, because I make the big movies with them, and they come see it in their hundreds of millions, so we love but our American audiences really do especially the big audiences, they need things pretty much in their face a bit more. And that's what we want the narration to do.
So this is exclusively for American audiences?
Well, that's for the American, we're not going to release it because the film's already come out in Australia.
And, well, good. That's good. I think for the American market, I'd definitely be looking into that. Just for the American market, absolutely.
Yeah. We can't stop it from then finding its way elsewhere, but people simply be aware that for America, like with many other films, changes are made for a particular market. Films get released in China, they get tweaked, sometimes in very unattractive ways.
I think what I would say is, let's talk about that, knowing that there is another version that's allowed to exist, as it were, out there. Let's talk about that in conjunction with partnering it on the back of a deal for a new project.
Yes. And you would write the narration. Again, just we obviously would want to approve the narration, but we're not going to bring in another writer to do it. You and whoever you like can redo this new narration track that we want. Again, just to punch up the drama. So, you know, can't afford to rely on American audiences to try and feel their way through the story as they do with the current version. We kind of want to just push it a bit more so that they know pretty much what's going on inside Leo's head.
Then I would say yes, if we can partner that with a deal for the next project and get a finance plan already in place.
We'd do that. We'd very much want to make a deal with that, because we think that we can make lots of money out of this, which of course will come back to you and your people.
I would say yes.
The issue with marketing, I think, is crucial, especially for films like this. Now, we all know that the equivalent film of Little Tornadoes coming from America would have a much higher profile. There'd be TV ads, there'd be ads in magazines, there'd be all over online, but we know that the equivalent film from America would have a much higher profile. What think you of the issue of marketing and that kind of support? It seems to be still an afterthought for a lot of small Australian films.
It's just a missing piece. There's not enough support for marketing films in Australia. Dare I say there's not enough appreciation of the importance of marketing, of local content. We can't just put it out there, because if people don't know a film exists, they're not going to be having any interest in seeing it. So for me, it's about, I think, maybe a government-led initiative to help marketing our local produce, our local films that talk about our stories and our communities, to compete against films that are coming in from overseas. So instead of spending so much money on incentivizing Americans to come and film here, that's fine, but it should be in conjunction with supporting our creatives to not just make their own stories and films, but to get them to the public. Because there is a hunger from cinemas and exhibitors to see local products. They just need to have a bit of support in helping that happen.
Do you work for a place called Airbag?
Airbag is a great production house, Melbourne-based production house, so we do commercials and content in Australia, in Southeast Asia. So I've spent the last decade in and around finishing this film, doing commercials and short projects, and using the money from those projects to finish the feature. But it also has meant that I get to work with crew and great cast and travel around the region and explore different people, different communities, which I guess is exciting when you're a filmmaker and you're always looking for new inspiration.